Thank you everyone again for coming. I mean, I'm realizing it's quite a marathon session every day in a week, but it's good. We're actually building up to something very good, I think. Today we're going to be looking at Claudia Jones, and I'd like to start by us just getting into this quote from her so that we are able to really quickly begin to think about this question in this seminar session. And I'll speak to a bit about what came before in the other days that what we did, but also what I would like to do is go very quickly into her life story. I would like to use her life story and her intellectual work as a way for us to uncover and expose this question around class within the feminist movement. So Claudia Jones writes here, "Black women as workers, as blacks, as women, are the most oppressed stratum of the whole population. The super-exploitation of black woman worker is thus revealed not only in that she receives, as a woman, less than equal pay for equal work with men, but in that the majority of black women gets less than half the pay of a white woman." So this is her looking at the economic conditions of being a black woman and how important the question of class and money is to your level of oppression or how you experience oppression. And yesterday we spoke to how racism defines and limits black women's lives in so many ways. So there's a class oppression, and then there's also the race oppression and the ways in which black women are silenced, the long work that's been done by colonialism and imperialism around racism and what that has done for women, for black women in society. And then I think it's really important for us to think through this question of class, which is what we will be doing today. And I think that in doing these three things, we really cannot have a seminar series on the question of feminism without doing these three things, without looking at the question of gender. Yes, obviously, that's at the center. The question of class absolutely has to be at the center. And the question of race has to be at the center of it. And what ends up happening, what you see happening is that if we just took class on its own, we will ignore the question of race and we'll assume that women of a particular class are equal, so everything is fine in society. If women are okay in terms of having equal pay at work, then everything is fine. We've solved the problem. However, if you're a black woman and you are earning the same amount as a white woman in the workplace, and you live in a society that is culturally, socially, and even at times legalistically entrenched within racial hierarchies, you will still experience a different sort of discrimination that this class question just doesn't account for, right? And this is often the thing that people say, oh, no, you just need to worry about class. If you worry about class, everything will be fine. But that ignores the black experience. That ignores the discrimination that people face with racism. So you have to do all three things. And it has to be at that moment when all of those three things come together. That is the site of struggle. We are not talking about these three things to say, okay, there's an intersection theoretically, that's nice. That should point to us as people who want to be involved in a feminist project or people who are trying to promote a feminist project or build campaigns around a feminist cause. That should be the point at which we begin our struggle. It shouldn't be anywhere else. And I think if we did this and we did this properly, we would really build a society that recognizes the full emancipation of every human being. Right? Because this encompasses everything that's in society. But even further than that, as Audre Lorde says, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And I think this is absolutely important. Yesterday we spoke a lot about how the feminist movement, like all movements, like all organizations that are trying to change society, often end up reflecting that some of the negative divisions in society because it reflects society. You are of the society. People are coming from society into these movements. When they come into these movements, when they come into a space, automatically you haven't forgotten your prejudices. You bring it with you, even if you are trying to change. So I think that all of this, it's not just race, class, and gender then. There's also a variety of different multiple layered identities that we have, right? So yes, you may be an African woman who is working class, but that's not just your identity. You might also be going to the church. You might also belong to a sewing club. You might also do martial arts at the same time. All of those things are part of your identity. So we need to constantly expand and think through those multi-layered identities. And it's very important that we are not doing this and not concentrating on a politics of identity outside of a politics of the material world. That has to be constantly stressed, because a politics of identity outside the material world and outside the class question can very quickly just become an elitist project that's all about a performative politics of identity. Like, if I can perform my blackness well enough, then I'm okay, I'm very radical. Yet you will not take into account the questions of class and the very serious economic conditions that are affecting women. I'm sure you all know this, right? There's these like certain types of African men who become quite Afrocentric. And then they're like, we are the best African men on earth, and then they want to tell all African women how to behave. We will liberate y'all because we know the truth, we know all these things, and then, then they come and tell you what to do, right? So that's not actually liberation. That's someone using an identity in order to continue and keep the hierarchy there. But if you took the question of class and gender seriously, then that identity can't form. So it cannot just be a politics of identities, because our identities has real material impact in the world, and we are materially impacted by the world. So it always has to be embedded in this question of class. And I think that, we always think, well, can this be done? Can we have this movement that is not so divisive, that is not divided? I mean, it's interesting that the feminist movement, which is supposed to be intersectional, is divided by issues of race and class, and now even questions around gender. It gets divided in this way. How do we bring this together? And on the first day, what we had done was we looked at the 1956 Women's March moment. I think it's important for us to go back to talk about this just very briefly for people who weren't here, but also it needs to be reinforced that we in our country in 1956 as women managed to come together across race, across class, across, gender was the question, but it was across all those things that they were able to come together and have a mass campaign. Right? It was like Ruth first says, there were women from churches, there were women from factories, there were old women, there were all types of women who were coming, white, Indian, African, colored women were coming in. It was a mass campaign. So it had been done, and it had been done dealing with the issue that affected the most dispossessed in society. So if we are able to do that in 1956, we can recreate and do that again. We need to use that moment. We need to use this month to recommit ourselves, to remake ourselves so that we can do this work moving forward. And we are not stuck endlessly in these questions. Because, comrades, we know what we have to do. Everyone knows this. I'm talking about this, but y'all know it, right? It's not something I'm telling y'all that y'all don't know. Y'all are in this world too. I don't have some special gift that I can tell y'all and y'all are not. Y'all live this every day. It's y'all's experiences. We need to now begin to do that work and build from this. And I think looking at Claudia Jones' life, we begin to really see through her life story, how someone is able to, in very difficult situations, able to work through all of the difficulties and limitations of various movements, not just feminism, but also communism, and movements around different communities, like the West Indian community in England. I think it's really important for us to be able to know her story. How many comrades here actually know who she is? Can raise your hands if you know her. If you don't, how many don't know her? Don't feel shy, yes. Okay, right. Y'all don't know her. But how many of you know President John F. Kennedy? You can raise your hands, right? You all know President John F. Kennedy is, right? Okay, great. So you see, just this little thing. How many of us know who John F. Kennedy is? Who's done absolutely nothing for the African woman in the world, and certainly not in South Africa, and certainly not contributed anything that could help in our lives. But we know about him because of the ways in which dominant narratives of capital and patriarchy work in society. And the silencing of someone like Claudia Jones happens precisely because they don't want you to know. But it's important for us to know her life story, not only to learn from it, like we had to do from the woman in 1956, but to be able to understand our ancestral links back to women like Claudia Jones. So they give us the confidence in the present to be able to move forward and to be able to do things and be able to make a change. Because if she can do this in like the 1930s and 1940s and 1960s, we can also do things now in 2023. We also have more freedoms, so we can do more things. But if we don't know about her, we don't know about the amazing work she's done, her theoretical articulation about the condition of black women, then we don't have anything to draw from. We keep on starting from scratch all the time. So I think it's really important that we create our own pantheon of women that we can draw strength from, we can draw confidence from, and we can try to emulate in small ways in our actual life. So Claudia Jones was a communist, a lifelong communist, in fact, a Marxist feminist and a Leninist. A Leninist means you follow a particular type of Marxism. It's the correct type. She was born in 1915 in Porto, Spain, in Trinidad and Tobago. And Trinidad and Tobago is actually very close, that white bit that's on the edge there. It's about 18 kilometers from Venezuela, which is like a very large country. And she was born to a family, and in the condition in which she was born in Trinidad and Tobago, it was within the British, it was still a British colony, but the economy of Trinidad and Tobago in 1915, right up until the 1930s, was really quite collapsing. There was a lot of strikes, there was a lot of issues around workers, but there was also a sort of the worldwide flu epidemic. And this we all can relate to, just coming out of the COVID pandemic. So this caused huge economic crash in Trinidad and Tobago. And so her parents decided to move to the United States. From Trinidad. And when they got to the United States, they arrived in New York City, in Harlem, in 1924. Both Jones's parents had very low-paying jobs. And her sister and herself and three of her sisters, they attended school. And she was an honors student, but the family were too poor, so they couldn't pay for her to even attend a graduation. That's the conditions under which she grew up in. Her mother died at the age of 37 of spinal meningitis. And yeah, I mean, just thinking about what you told me just now, it's completely shocking. And the living conditions that they lived under were so bad that Claudia also developed tuberculosis. And that had a long-term impact on her health. And she was very poor. She couldn't attend college. So she started working, but she joined a drama group. And she also used to write under her column name, Claudia Comments, for the Harlem Journal. And this is what she wrote about the USA. And it's really amazing. She says, together with my three sisters, our family suffered not only the impoverished lot of working-class native families and its multinational populace, but early learned the special scourge of indignity stemming from Jim Crow national oppression. That's the racial laws as well. So immediately there's class oppression and race oppression. My mother had died 2 years earlier of spinal meningitis, suddenly at her machine in a garment shop. The conditions of non-union organization of that day, of speed up, plus a lot of working women who are mothers, and undoubtedly the weight of immigration to a new land, conditions were far from as promised or anticipated, contributed to her early death at 37. I was later to learn that this lot was not just an individual matter, but that millions of working class people and black people suffered this lot under capitalism. So for Claudia Jones, her commitment to her class politics, her commitment to her communism, and her commitment to her feminism was not a theoretical question. It was born out of her actual life and living conditions. And as she began to write and become more active in various sorts of work in the 1920s and 30s, she became aware of the sort of organized lynching, which we spoke about yesterday with Ida B. Wells, about the organized lynching in the South of the United States as a tool to keep the African American population economically depressed, but also oppressed and live in fear of this sort of punishment. And she started thinking about campaigns around lynching, and she actually joined the campaign that was started by Ida B. Wells on lynching. And she did this work, and she also learned at this time about the Scottsboro Boys. There were 9 black youths who were arrested for allegedly raping 2 young white women. And this story is a story that continues even till today. The ways in which black male sexuality is viewed as a danger, and the ways in which this then gets used as a means to say we have to protect white women from these black men. We know about this in South Africa. The Swart Kafar comes exactly out of this. The legitimation for apartheid was that these black men are all over, our white women are actually in danger from them. We need to have controls in place. And this is a long-used method, and people are always discussing which society, the US or SA, who influenced each other? Who influenced each other on their racial laws? You know, because it's very interesting, that link. And as a result also, our activists also share a link with each other, because what's happening in the US in terms of trying to liberate yourself also comes into South Africa, and vice versa. Even if you think as recently as the student movements that were happening, the Black Lives Matters were happening, and those things were sort of feeding into each other in very interesting ways. And so she basically learned about the arrests, and she was looking for an organization who she could work with around campaigns for these young men, who, by the way, were all imprisoned. Most of them, 8 out of 9 of them were imprisoned. Most of them had the death sentence commuted to life. Many of them spent years in prison. The shortest amount of time was 6 years. And it's only in 2013 that the state of Alabama overturned this case, even though at the time there was absolute concrete evidence that they had not raped these 2 women. So this becomes a groundbreaking case, and it also becomes a moment that begins the civil rights movement. It's one of the key events that lead to this. So what Jones does is she finds this organization, the Communist Party in the United States, and she goes there because they are the ones who are running this campaign. But also the Communist Party at the time in the United States really was very progressive, because shortly after the revolution in Russia, Russia had already legalized abortion in 1921. They had legalized divorce, opposed the oppression of national minorities. They decriminalized homosexuality. And like yesterday I told you, they opened those communal kitchens and communal childcare for women. This was done in 1921. People. In the United States, still today, that backwater that likes us to think they're very advanced, that country, till today they are fighting about whether a woman has a right to decide what to do with her own body. Till today, they are deciding whether people who are homosexual have the right to even live or live full lives. So, I mean, who is the more advanced nation, I ask you? Anyway, so she joined this, and actually the Communist Party in the United States, like the Communist Party in South Africa, were the first organizations to begin to campaign against racism very actively, but also do it in a way that was non-racial. And so she was really drawn to this, and she began working with the Communist Party very closely. And this is what she says about that moment. I learned that those who fought most consistently for the interest of the workers, for their trade union organization and social needs were the communists. My daily experience as a black youth in the USA led me to search out political forces that were doing something about these things. political forces who not only fought on a day-to-day basis to alleviate these conditions, but who had a perspective as to a radical solution of these conditions. So it wasn't just talking about these conditions, they had a perspective of how to change this. And that was incredibly attractive to not just Claudia Jones, but many African Americans and many people in the global third world, in the global south in general. That is why across the world, in the global south, there's communist parties who were fighting against imperialism and colonialism because they had a very solid alternative of what could be done and what could actually be built. And furthermore, she also begins to think about the ways in which black women and working class black women within these structures are the most oppressed. And after World War II, there were lots of calls for women to begin to go back to the home. So during World War I and World War II, when men are gone off to fight, they now all of a sudden need women to start doing a lot of jobs all over the world, in the UK, in the US, even in South Africa. And this is an opening up. It's a moment where women can now enter the workplace for the first time and do things like wear pants. Imagine that. Highly, 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 highly dangerous and, you know, out there thing to do. So they could even wear pants because they said, well, your dresses will get caught in the factory machines, so you can wear pants now. So this begins to happen, this active change, and women are out there, they're working. After World War II ends, the men come back and they're like, oh, thanks, women, for building the aeroplanes. Thanks for farming. Thanks for running all the factories, doing all this work. But now the men are back, y'all can go back home. And there's this whole move to build this thing about the women's places in the kitchen. And this is happening throughout the 50s. And you'll see, even in the 1950s, the types of dresses that women now have to wear are like really closed up here and they're quite wide. Makes it quite impossible to just live your normal daily life, right? And this becomes the fashion. And it becomes fashionable to stay at home and take care of your man and take care of your family. And they begin to build houses that reflect that with the nuclear family across the world. And then they invent new things to make your lives a bit easier, like the washing machine or the dishwasher. But you need to stay at home and do this work and this labor for your family. The unpaid social reproduction labor. You have to do this. You have to go back to doing that. It becomes a huge point of contestation in society because women now are used to being independent. They are used to earning their own money. And this becomes a big point of action. And Claudia Jones herself takes this on, but she goes one further than just saying women need to have work. She's pointing out the condition of the African woman. And she says, this is absolutely amazing. She says, the bourgeois ideologists have not failed, of course, to develop a special ideological offensive aimed at degrading black women. They cannot, however, with any equanimity or credibility, speak of the black woman's place as in the home, for black women are in other people's kitchens. Right? So there isn't the home. So they can't actually target black women with this because they are working as domestic workers in white people's homes. And this is something she actually gets so early on, and she latches onto that and how these narratives exclude people. So I think that is something that's a really, really important point. And Jones's work then as a civil rights activist continues, her commitment to communism continues, and her work as a feminist continues and is growing. And through her writing, she's gaining some sort of notoriety, some fame in the United States. And the United States, being as it is, that lovely country of freedoms, and their absolute constant ignorance about communism and anything progressive, begin a sort of Red Scare campaign. Like, the United States and the apartheid state have so much in common. Right? The United States' intention and structure is to oppress black people, and the United States hates communism. The apartheid state was the same thing. And yet we all idolize the state because of the cultural work it does to have hegemony over us in the world, right? Consistently it does this. And we need to also question that. I could go on about this forever, but I'll shut up now about that point. But anyway, so what they begin to do is they start launching, as part of the widespread Red Scare, McCarthyism, like they're doing now in the United States, they begin to say, well, you know, they actually arrest Claudia Jones with 21 other members of the Communist Party, and she goes to trial in 1951. And in her trial, she actually says, sorry, this is the earlier version I gave you, I need to, yeah, it's fine, don't worry. In the trial, she actually says two important things. She talks about the condition of African Americans, but she also exposes the hypocrisy that's at the heart of the American discourse about itself. So she says, for full and unequivocal equality for my people, the Negro people, which as a communist, I believe can only be achieved allied to the cause of the working class. She's giving a sort of diagnosis of what needs to be happening. Then she says that she'd learned about racism not in Trinidad, but in the United States. Out of my Jim Crow experiences as a young Negro woman, the bitter indignity and humiliation of second-class citizenship, the special status which makes a mockery of our government's prated claims of a free America in a free world. So this is the speech she gives at her trial. So obviously she's found guilty of being an enemy of the state, and they also use a sort of technical act around immigration to say that she was illegally in the country. So between 1951 and 1955, there's several appeals. But in 1955, she begins her sentence in jail for 1 year, and she is let out on the 23rd of October, 1955. When she's let out on the 23rd of October, 1955, she immediately is deported to Trinidad and Tobago. But in Trinidad and Tobago, the Governor General at the time did not want her there. They said she will be a troublemaker. So she was basically like in limbo, who was going to take her? And England, of all places, said you could come to England. And I just actually forgot to mention something really important. In her year in jail, that was the first time she suffered her first heart attack as well, at a very young age, from obviously an outcome of the tuberculosis. So she goes from United States to England, a place she's never been to. She knows no one there. But immediately she decides she's going to start the work. And she contacts the sort of the British Communist Party. And they were fine with her at first, but very quickly grew tired of her claims and her demands to constantly take race seriously, right? And we all know this in the communist movement. This is a key thing, right? I'm a communist, and I'm saying this as a communist. This is a key thing. If you want to bring an issue of race, or you want to bring the issue of gender into the discussion, you're told, no, it's class. Class is above everything. And then they wonder why they can't actually attract people to the communist movement, right? And there's always usually these old white men sitting there saying, no, it's only about class. It's only about class. It's not about race. That's just a discourse that's employed. If we deal with class, everything will be fine. What that does, and I don't not disagree. I don't not think that if you don't deal with the economic conditions of society, you don't alleviate a lot of things. But what it also does is it does not allow people the space to express their oppression and have a space to talk about what they've been through and their experiences. It's negated in the name of a progressive discourse around class. And that has been, I think, at the heart of the problems of organizing as communists for the last 30 years, in fact, because there were moments when that was not the case. There were moments, like if you think about the South African Communist Party, where race and class were taken incredibly seriously. The conditions of imperialism were taken incredibly seriously. And in fact, that's still the case. It's more like these intellectual communists you find at universities that are a big problem. And also you have this happening with black communists in the United States in the 70s and 80s with the likes of Angela Davis, the Black Panther movement and all of that, where these questions of intersectionality are taken absolutely seriously and all the time embedded in a question of class, which it has to be. So I think that she comes up against this, but she's like, oh no, it's cool. there's enough people who are coming in. There are enough immigrants who are coming into this country, and they are experiencing all sorts of discrimination, all sorts of racism. So what she ends up doing is she goes and takes over and starts writing and editing for publishing, like for a newspaper called West Indian Gazette. And this was an Afro-Asian Caribbean news paper, and it was the first time in England that you had a major black newspaper. And it was about sharing stories for this diaspora population of African Asians who are living in England, who are coming in this period of the 50s and 60s in great number, especially after the war. And it was also about ways to bring about political discourse and discussions and so on. So this newspaper, like all major communists have done, including Lenin, she uses it as an organizing tool, right? And it's a very important organizing tool. And so she does this. But also, in addition to this, she's not just writing this newspaper and doing other activism. She also starts the Notting Hill Carnival. Now, the Notting Hill Carnival today has millions of people visiting it. It's incredibly popular. It's a major tourist draw card in the United Kingdom. The reason why she decided to start this was because there was a young man, Kelso Cochran, who was killed by the police, a West Indian young immigrant into London. And he was killed right there in St. Pancras in Notting Hill. And so what she does is she goes around to offer comfort to the sort of communities that around in the area, the West Indian community, and she finds that people are really down. They're really unhappy. This has really hurt them to the soul, the sort of racist violence that has occurred in their space. And she says, well, you know what? Why don't we actually take this out of our heart and let's do something that we've done in the Caribbean. Let's have a carnival. And let's have this carnival so we celebrate our culture, we celebrate ourselves, and we bring joy back into our lives in some way. And this process of culture she uses very, very well, Kate, because she's now thinking about how culture makes us human, and how when you are denied your culture, your humanity is lessened. You know this. When we are told we can't speak English in the right way, we are made less, isn't that so? When we speak English with an accent, we are made less. We are seen stupider. So it's the culture, it's our language in which our language gets smashed and we're told we can't speak our language. It's in our food. I mean, how many times is the food we eat, if you went to like a middle class Model C type school, or even amongst your friends who are particular, we don't eat this thing, we don't eat tripe, we don't eat all these things. You know, it's like this, like a constant negation of who you are as a person. And she understood this very well. So she also brings this into the communist movement. She brings this cultural aspect that is often there, but is also often absent. And she brings this in and she bases it on the culture of the dispossessed. She's not trying to assume as a communist the culture of Russia or the culture of the working class in England. She says the West Indians also have a culture. They also have this thing that they can contribute, that can make them whole, that needs to be celebrated. And so this becomes the sort of start of the Notting Hill Carnival. And so I wonder if all those people that go there when it's happening and celebrating understand this history of the Notting Hill Carnival and how important it is for us. It's even the same with the Mardi Gras in New Orleans. The Mardi Gras in New Orleans was started by the sort of African American communities who are African American but also Native American. A lot of slaves who escaped slavery went in and lived with Native Americans. And then you had a population that was developed between African Americans and Native Americans. And a lot of the Mardi Gras started with those chiefs who are half African American, half Native American, who have both those ancestries, affirming themselves and their identities as well. So it has this radical root, like everything. Also, it's really important because it's an example of how we need to organize, not all the time through boring things. We also need to organize through fun things. We also need to bring joy into our organizing. I mean, if we have to always organize like we are dying and everything's so terrible, no one's going to be attracted to us. They'll all sit at home watching American TV and seeing the latest housewives of I don't know which city, endlessly, Atlanta, Joburg, KZN, now Nigeria, wherever, and we have no way to win. And all you can do is sit and watch these housewives with obscene wealth, while the only thing you really own is your subscription to Netflix. Right? So what we need to do is we need to deal with this. And we, as the left, we as people who are interested in liberating society, in not creating a society where a few people can masquerade the wealth for us to watch as a spectacle, we need to make sure that we make our struggles something that people are attracted to, something that people want to come to. And I think she really understood this all too well. And you know what? I'm going to end very soon. What's really important about Claudia Jones is she lived not a long life, right, as you will see. And her newsroom was above a coffee shop and was in the West Indian community. And she was really able to rebuild her life. And she was really able to continue with her commitment to anti-racism, her commitment to feminism, and her commitment to communism. And really built a really sort of became a leader, built her reputation as a leader on these questions, and was visited by a whole range of people, from Martin Luther King to James Baldwin, and even W.E.B. Du Bois, and Kwame Nkrumah as well visited her. So it was anti-colonial leaders, there were civil rights leaders who took her absolutely seriously. So she was able to become someone who carved a new way, right, as a black woman who's a communist and a feminist. This is so important, being a sort of communist, feminist, and African. These three things. And she was able to do this and do it exceptionally well. Claudia Jones died at the age of 49, unfortunately, in 1964 on Christmas Eve. She died of a heart attack and of tuberculosis. And it's so interesting that she lived her life so fiercely, she lived her life so full and with such commitment, but the conditions, the material conditions of her youth still impacted on her body and her physicality. You know, that's really something. And interestingly enough, she's buried just to the left of Karl Marx in Highgate Cemetery, right? So that's really, really quite a thing. And in her tombstone, I know you all can't see it, I couldn't get a clearer copy of it. She says, they say that she was a gallant fighter against racism and imperialism who dedicated her life to the progress of socialism and the liberation of her own black people. And her book is called Left of Marx, the biography on her. And it's literally because she's on the left of Karl Marx. And I think this is really interesting because, in a way, she was a bit left, even politically, of Karl Marx, in the ways in which she organized, in the ways in which she expanded Marxism and made it something that encompasses everyone else. And this is not Marx's fault. I mean, Marx was living in a particular time in history, and he was looking at a very particular historical condition, the ways in which class developed and capital in Northern Europe. That's what he was doing. He was an economist, and he was writing this economic history and telling you this. And he died. So, you know, you can't say he could do everything. But she takes this work of Marx, she takes the work of Lenin, and she expands upon it and makes it this thing that we can really use as a tool. And I think that, you know, she should really be someone we think about when we think about how it is we would like to approach our life and what we'd like to do when we are thinking about building something. You know, she lived courageously, and she understood at the same time that the project of capitalism and patriarchy and imperialism is a project of splitting people apart. It's a project of splitting and dividing society and creating hierarchies when you split and divide society. And she sought to undo those things. She understood them, and she says we have to undo it. And one of the key ways she thinks we could undo this is by embedding our feminism within a working class project. And I want to return again to her quote here on women's emancipation. And it is about the working woman, the working black woman. Only to the extent that we shall fight all chauvinist expressions and actions as regards the black people and the fight for full equality of the black people can women as a whole advance their struggle for equal rights. for the progressive women's movement, the black woman who combines her status as the worker, and the black woman who combines the state, and the black woman is the vital link to this heightened political consciousness to extend further that the cause of black woman worker is promoted. She will be enabled to take her rightful place in the black proletariat leadership of the national liberation movement, and by her active participation, contribute to the entire American working class, whose historic mission is the achievement of a socialist America, the full and final and full guarantee of women's emancipation. So she understood this. She understood that in order to get the full emancipation of society, socialism was the way, but that it had to be embedded in the struggles of working class women. And that is where we need to start our struggles. Regardless of our race, regardless of our class privilege, that is where we need to be present, that is where we need to organize, and that is the class with which we need to show solidarity. Because if you think about the triple burden, the triple burden of oppression, you begin to understand very well that once people who are working class, once the working class woman is liberated fully, both in terms of unpaid labor and then exploited wages as a worker, you will have everyone in society fully emancipated. I will stop there and thank you very much.
No, thank you, Vashna, for a riveting conversation. So I'm going to use you to work through my own issues that especially in terms of theory, and the concept of how you describe intersectionality. You use gender, class, and race, but I'm not satisfied, because I'm wondering. I want to look at going beyond intersectionality, because for me, how the theories that I look at are theories that engage with how do we bring the invisible back to visible. And so I'm feeling that intersectionality is just not doing that work. And every time we talk intersectionality, it's always boom, boom, or boom. It's either gender, class, race, or class, race, queer, LGBTQI, and I'm wondering, how do we begin thinking of the unthinkable? How can my intersectionality begin to incorporate the things that I have yet to even conceive? Could you please speak on that?
Okay, but what's this unthinkable? I don't know what it is for you.
Let me see the blind spots.
Okay.
I'm worried about my blind spots. I'm worried that there's going to be a group that I'm not able to, like you mentioned how the black woman must be considered, but then I would then ask you, but then what about the black trans woman? Shouldn't she be the one? Because she's even, her oppression is even more, her vulnerability is even more, especially within black spaces. Because even black women can participate in the oppression of black trans women. Mm-hmm. So this is what I'm asking, those blind spots. How do we begin to navigate those? Thank you.
Cool. I think I'll just answer this. Is there more questions? Okay, let me do this and then we can get to the...
Can I just ask, can you please explain to me, like I'm a 4-year-old Christian student, how, because when you spoke about Claudia, you said she was a communist, but then on her headstone, on her grave, it speaks about socialism, and also on this quote, she speaks about a socialist America. So can you touch on the marriage of all of these philosophies, because sometimes we think it's just one thing and we can only be one thing, and I don't believe in that. I believe that there's many things to believe in and to be, and not to necessarily be labeled into one paradigm. So how does the communism in her marry the socialist in her?
Okay. All right, cool. I think the thing that is important is, yes, I mean, gender, class, and race. But by gender, we don't mean just women. I mean, gender is about a variety of identities, right? I didn't say woman, class, and race. Right? I can say woman, class, and race. That means something else. And I can say gender, class, and race, and that means something else. So it does go beyond. It goes beyond that. But in terms of the invisible and the blind spots, I think that, when you say, yes, okay, well, there is someone that's more oppressed than the trans black woman, I would go further and say the most oppressed would probably be a poor black trans woman, not just any black trans woman, because a middle-class black trans woman who's able to navigate life with some economic mobility is much better off than a poor black woman, right? So I think that those levels of those spots we can only get when we are engaged with people and engaged in struggle. Because, when you can have the theory and you can think about the theory, but it's in the making of organizing, of being with people where they're struggling, that you learn things that you didn't know. For example, like when I joined from the university, and I have amazing students like Mo and Vuyo and Kate and Musa here, I could speak in a particular way, using a particular language, right? And they all understood me because they have a particular privilege of education, right? But when you join the labor movement, and you are talking, and you continue to talk in that same register, you are losing people, right? And that's a blind spot that I didn't even realize I had. And I had to learn that. And the only way I could learn it is by putting myself in a different situation and a different context and organizing in that situation and context. And I think that if you want to think about how is it that I don't miss this, I think we have to commit ourselves to some sort of struggle within a space that is the most oppressed. And that's how we get to see our blind spots. Because our blind spots is about everything. It's about how we carry ourselves, how we speak, how we articulate ourselves, how we might look at someone. You can have all, for example, I'm always conscious of this. If you are in a room and you have a whole lot of people in the room, you can notice very quickly the people who won't speak. And often I'm right about the people who won't speak. And even in a space like Rhodes University, which is an incredibly privileged space, you know who's not going to speak. It's going to be the poor black student who comes from a rural area, right? Someone like Mo, for example, I'm sorry using you as an example, who comes from Johannesburg, who went to great school and all of those, and she could speak. She could articulate herself. But a poor black man who got a scholarship to come was silent in the class. And you need to pick that up, and you need to know what that's doing. And also how you, by your actions in some way, can enable that and create a culture, silent culture, that makes some people feel less. So I think it's in the doing, it's in becoming aware of yourself. Because, the theory is not there for us to change the world. Yes, we're going to change the world. But the theory is there for us to change ourselves and to evolve as ourselves and people. That's why you're constantly learning. I'm constantly learning every day. It's to change ourselves. And you can slip back into your old ways very quickly if you're not rigorous with your theoretical work on yourself. And that is not to say that the self becomes all important. No, it's about doing that so when you are in community with people, which you have to absolutely be, when you are in community with people, you do it in a way that is humane, that is better, and that can change society. I think that's absolutely important. So even when I call myself a communist very proudly, I'm not a communist yet. I'm a communist in the making. I am aspiring to be a communist because I have so many short givings. I have so many things that are, obviously I'll see a nice car driving past, like a beautiful Ferrari or BMW. Ooh, that's so lovely. What a nice car, fantastic. Or you see a garment, item of clothing, and you'll be like, oh, I really like that. We all have these weaknesses. We all have this. We have to do that work. Because if we don't do that work, and we just spout the theory out very nicely, very nicely, very nicely, then when we do change the world is not changed. Because when we take power, then we want tenders to buy the nice things, right? Made by people who are oppressing our people in the main. right? So I think it's really important that we build a politics of interrogating ourselves using the theory. And then all the time while you're in struggle, use it as a moment to evolve and change. And this leads very nicely to your question about communism and socialism. So socialism is an ideology that at the heart of it is that you need to have a radical economic change in society in order to have a more equal society, right? And that is ending capitalism, right? That's just the basic, broad socialism. But within socialism, there are different mechanisms and methods to get there, and there are different stages of advancement, right? And those things have different names. So under socialism, there's lots of different types of socialisms. And some people might even argue like the welfare state is a type of light socialism. The Faberians were a type of socialist. There were lots of debates between different people and different intellectuals in the 1700s and the 1800s about the question of socialism. And there's different ways, and it stems also, and it's often in conversation, like the French school of socialism, there are different varieties of it, right? Now when sometimes you'll say, I'm a communist, sometimes you'll say, I'm a socialist. You can use it interchangeably but not everyone who's a socialist is a communist. You can be a socialist and not be a communist, right? And she wasn't just a communist, she was a Marxist-Leninist communist, which is a very particular type of communism that highlights and is emphasizing the role of the working class in leading the struggle. That is at the base of it. Other forms of communism might say we need to change the culture of society, or we need to change from the self, or we just need to have economic change. So there's all these different ways. But the reason why they call you a socialist is it's a broader term to use. So for example, lots of communists will say, oh, I'm a socialist. It's broader, it's also more accepted, and it's wider. And sometimes if you want to hide that you're a communist, or you're a Marxist-Leninist communist, you say, oh, I'm a socialist, right? Because it's seen as softer. You can do a lot of things with it, right? But also what socialism is, as Marxist-Leninists, what you understand it to be, is you understand it to be a stage that's leading to communism. And yesterday we were talking about stages in struggle. What will happen is once you gain the state, once you gain control of the state, and you want to change the state, and you want to destroy capitalism, once you get the state, you haven't destroyed capitalism. Right? You now have to do that work of destroying capitalism. And in doing that work of destroying capitalism, it says, you know, the new is born, but the old is refusing to die, right? That capitalism is refusing to die, right? Because there's these niggling things that are going back and forth, back and forth. So socialism is that stage where you work it out. And you still need a lot of things in the socialist state, a lot of structures in the socialist state that will be required, like law and a variety of different structures, certain types of law will be needed to make sure that socialism can work, right? But in the socialist state, the law will be in benefit of the workers rather in benefit of the capitalist. Today, in our capitalist society, what is the key thing that our law is structured around? Anyone? Who is lawyers? Are there any lawyers? What is the key, what is at the heart of our law? I mean, besides like committing murder, I mean, we know that, but what is the heart, the center of our law? No. What is it that it's always defending? What is it that what is it, Toli? Private property. Private property is at the heart of what the law defends and how it's structured, right? But who owns private property? How many of us here own private property? And if you have a bond, you're not owning it, huh? Right? It's the capitalists that own private property. For 20 years of your life, it's the bank that has private property, not you with your bond. You are chained to this bond that you have to pay, right? So the law is, and you try not to pay your bond. What do? They take your house away. You take something. If you're starving in the streets and you go to the shop and you take bread to eat because you're starving. In a capitalist society, that bread was private property. You will now go to jail. In a communist or socialist society, they will ask the question, why did you need to steal that bread? What is wrong with our society that had to lead you to steal bread? Let's fix that in society so people don't have to go and take bread. That is the difference, right? And we see this all over. I mean, you see it in terms of when you think about private property, you think about poaching. That's a big thing, right? This land now belongs to Kruger Park. No one can come in. You come in, you kill animals, even though your ancestors have been doing it for hundreds of years. Now that's you poaching. All of a sudden, that becomes poaching, that act, right? That act of poaching, you are not poaching. You are doing something. You need to feed your family. You're doing something to get by. Anyway, who decided those elephants only belong to certain people? Or I don't say go and kill elephants. I'm not saying that at all. Please don't go kill elephants. Don't kill animals if you don't need to. But what I'm saying is that who decides that fishing in a river is illegal? And if you are fishing in that river now, you are poaching. It's this private property. It's putting a fence around things. And that is what the law is based on. And who is it protecting all the time? The owners of private property. It's not a law that is seeking to rehabilitate and make society better. And that's what you'll need to think about. You'll need to think about that all the time when you're thinking about the law. How do we make society better? So in socialism, all of that gets worked out. And the idea, the ideal, or the ambition is that then you go into a communist society. So like yesterday we said, we use terms, we use the things we need to get to that point. The communist society is the zenith point, where we've worked things out, and communists, people, I know when you'll see American films, they portray communists as being very rough and tough, and usually Russian and hardcore and just not nice people. And I know we also don't have great examples now in our own country, unfortunately. We did have some really great examples like Chris Hani, Ruth First. So what happens is you have this vision of communists as being life denying, as being harsh, as being crazy, as almost like a Putinesque figure, even though Putin himself is not a communist. That's what popular media tries to show you. But communists are actually have an absolute love for humanity. Not only that, they have an absolute, I mean, sometimes I even think if it could be real, this ambition, that we all just will learn once we have access to resources and our lives are economically the same in different ways, that we don't lack for the things we need that makes our life joyful. We will live together in harmony and work it out. That is what the vision is of communism. It's quite utopian, actually, and it has an absolute belief in the goodness of human beings. And that is at the heart of it. It is a sort of ideology of love for the human, and understanding and hope in the human being and in the human condition. That's why I continuously give this lecture. I mean, I continuously talk about feminism. I continuously talk about communism. Poor Kate has sat through, I don't know how many times I've spoken about this. And I do it till I'm blue in the face, not because, I mean, I do like to talk a lot, but it's also because I have a hope that we can, from this, spark something where we change society and where we are able to get the best out of ourselves as human beings. So I think that is something we need to go. And that's what communists are. That's what a true communist should be. Yeah, cool. Hazard, how are you? Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead?
Oh.
Okay, sure. So you mentioned the nigglings of capitalism and touched on resources. I wonder, do you think there's any redemption in sort of the institutional challenges that we face, particularly people in the labor movement that are being exploited? Are there redemptive qualities that you see currently within the South African context that could be applied or not?
How do you mean redemptive measures?
So we're touted as having one of the best constitutions and labor laws, right? But even in themselves are based on problematic narratives that we've inherited from colonialism and apartheid. And so in reproducing that, is there any end goal? Is there any chance for change?
Yes, okay, great.
Yeah.
Carl, I got you. Azad?
Hi. First I want to say congratulations, because your passion is very infectious. So
My children don't think so, though.
We'll tell them. Okay, so my first question is, what is your take on equality? Because I think, particularly in South Africa, I think the concept of equality has been one of the most pernicious concepts, particularly to the majority who have been disenfranchised, and I think these days it's even ameliorated by, no, it's not equal, it's equal opportunity. And I think that is one of the most pernicious principles in our country, in my opinion. Now, you've mentioned also, okay, so, and then the other question is on intersectionality, you know, I'm thinking about Hannah Arendt's statement on the sin of chosenness. So when you want to take a particular attribute of your being and you want to anchor your struggle or whatever it is on that, and how does this, whether be it you call it feminism or intersectionality, what is your take on that? And then the last one is on, now you just called yourself a communist, socialist. Okay, I'm not particularly an expert in those fields, but you know, I'm currently reading Julia Lovell's Maoism, and one of the things that she highlights is the contest between Stalin and Khrushchev and Maoism for global domination in their efforts to spread communism, because in a way, in my view, it's sort of imperialism given a different name. And I mean, if you think of the communism, of the consequences of the famine in China, of I don't remember the name that came out of the collectivization in Russia. So, given those type of examples, what do you think of communism and its efforts to try and aspire for global domination, if you could say?
Cool, thank you. All right, so I think this question around redemptive qualities that are currently there, I think it's really important that we use whatever tools we can. So even if it is not in the bourgeois capitalist system that we are living in, we can't now say we won't do anything to change the situation in small ways, if we can, because we're waiting for this moment of communism or socialism or something to happen. That's quite a depoliticizing way of working. I think what we rather should be doing is using these little tools that we can, using something like the Constitution, even though it's got issues, even though it might be compromised or limiting in some ways, there's certain things we can use in there. I mean, every day in the labor movement, we make visible gains by using the Constitution. We have absolutely important gains around, workers' rights, around the right to strike. All of those things really do help us, and it's important for those to remain. The point is that we keep those, but we can make them better. What we have is fine, it's good, but we need to use it, make it better, even if we just did something like truly follow the Constitution of South Africa, which we don't even do. Right? If we actually just did some of the basic things like equal quality education, equality for all, freedom of movement, if we just did a few of those things, we'd already have a much better society. Right? We'd already have a society that's looking closer to what we want it to look. Access to quality housing, access to electricity, access to water. If we do those few basic things that's already there, we'll already have a much better society. And no one can say that that shouldn't be done. Yes, it must be done, and it gives us a tool to fight. But there's things about the Constitution that if you're a poor person, you can't really access that Constitution. You can't go and fight in court to say, I don't actually have a house, and the Constitution it says, because you don't have access to law. And you don't have access to law because law is commodified in our country. So we can then fight for decommodification of law, where you don't have to pay tens of thousands or 70,000 rand an hour to a high silk to decide something for your case, right? So I think those are the kinds of things we can definitely do. So I think there's hope, and there's work that we can, and there's opportunities that we have, and we must take those opportunities wherever we can, and use them. And we must fight for them to remain, but we must take it also further. We mustn't become complacent. In terms of this meaning of equality. I think it is really interesting, because what tends to happen, and what has tended to happen in post-apartheid South Africa, is a lot of things have become instrumentalized or technocratic. Like, even if it's you know, when people are like fighting for housing, or if they're fighting for electricity or water, it's called service delivery protests, as if there's just an issue of service delivery. And that's not an issue, because in 2010, when the World Cup was happening, were those stadiums not delivered? They were delivered, and they were delivered very quickly. The BRICS is happening now in Sandton. Sandton is delivering. I mean, if you see Sandton now, Sandton looks like the most amazing, it looks like Dubai. It's like, I got a shock. All of a sudden, all the lights are working. In fact, there's more lights. I didn't know we had so much of lights. The lights are so extreme, and they're colorful, and the buildings are all colors, and I was shocked. I didn't know all of this was possible while we were sitting in darkness. I mean, I drove past there the other night, like 3 nights ago, and I was absolutely shocked by the Sandton, right? So they can deliver. It's not a service delivery issue. It is an issue of dignity. It's an issue that the state thinks that some people do not need or deserve this. That's the issue. And the same thing has happened with this question of equality. It's like, oh, okay, well, you know, you can have a job, but what's the quality of the job? You can have education. What is the quality of that education? No one's asking that question. Or the quality of that. It's just a technical thing. We're now ticking the boxes, and we're doing these things. And hence, it becomes a really, really difficult thing. And then also, it can be used so opportunistically, right? Equal opportunity. We're creating equal opportunity here, right? And then that gets used by people who are in power in various ways to continue to enrich themselves and keep themselves in power. So it becomes something that has lost a whole lot of meaning. It can be used in so many ways. You just put equality in front of it, Institute for Equality, blah, 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 blah. And then you can say whatever you like, right? So I think that's what it is. It's that the meaning of the word, which should be embedded within people's dignity, and human beings' dignity, is taken out. It's hollowed out. And that's the problem, because it's done by making it a technocratic issue. Right? So I think that's definitely what, for me, equality is, yes, we do need technical solutions. Obviously, we need to make sure the road is built straight and we can drive on it. We need to make sure the house is going to stand up. We need those technical things. But what is driving that technical expertise and the technical solutions has to constantly be embedded within our understanding that everyone is a full human. And that, for me, is what is equality, is the full humanity of everyone. And then in terms of Arendt's thing about this, the chosenness, right, and the particular, I think this is really important, because that then can become a reified identity, right? And it can also become a problem, because it's, you are, if you say, I'm only this type of thing, I'm only a feminist, I'm only a worker, I'm only that, you then take yourself out of the human condition. And that is why I think an intersectionality, if it's done properly, if it's done not by taking one strand, but by where all those strands meet, you can't be reified, because you are multiple things, right? But then what can also happen is this focus on the identity can become a way to reify yourself. And this is a problem. So we always have to have that grounded and embedded within the material world. Right? I mean, communists have always been thinking intersectionally. They didn't just use the word, right? It always took seriously the question of class and women and race, as you can see, for the last 100 years when I'm talking about these women and their experiences. And tomorrow when we're doing Emma Mashinini, we'll see the same thing. But I think that we must be able to build confidence in who we are and the multipleness of our identities and accept it. But at the same time, we don't become so tied to it that when we need to evolve and change, we don't, because then we are just becoming like sort of kitsch versions of what it is we need to be. And so identities aren't fixed. It's constantly moving and changing. And we must be able to embrace that and be open to that. And then in terms of this, Julia Lovell's, she seems like she really doesn't like communists. I don't know, I haven't read it, but she seems like she really doesn't like communists. I mean, This notion that communism wants to dominate the world. Well, I mean, I think that if something is good and some idea is good and you found it, you want to tell everyone about it, that's great. But we know that's not what she means. She's talking about the ways in which society also can become destructive, even in a communist society or a socialist society. But the thing about Russia under Stalin and Khrushchev and stuff, it's no longer a full communist society. Many people would argue it's still in that stage of trying to become communist, right? And that people who are within those movements themselves are acting in ways that's destroying communism, right? That's what some people would actually argue in terms of that. And in terms of this idea of world domination, I mean, even with Maoism, I mean, this thing about world domination by China or Russia or whoever, it's become a really popular thing. And it's become a really popular thing. I mean, if you took China, for example, China, even India, those countries have had a closed-door policy to the world for most of the 20th century, right? China didn't interfere in anyone's business for most of the 20th century. India never interfered in anyone's business. Russia, when it did interfere, it came in to give support. Where was the United States of America in the anti-apartheid movement? Were they anywhere? No. Who was it that was giving support? Who was it that fought in the Battle of Kute Carnaval? It was the Cubans, who had absolutely nothing. In fact, the Cubans, who were in a missile crisis with the United States, took all of their weapons and sent it to South Africa to assist us and left themselves exposed. Has the Cubans ever asked us for our diamonds or our gold or our anything, any of our resources, our platinum? No. And then when we struggle, they send bloody nurses and doctors to us. And then when we need people to be trained, we send them to Cuba. They have never asked us for a single thing. Fidel Castro put it perfectly. He says, while the United States is building guns and bombs to destroy the world, we are building doctors who will send out to heal the world. And that is the communism that is important. But that's the same people that someone like this Lovell person would say, oh, that's global domination that they want. No. Which country in Africa has been colonized by China? I'm just asking this question in an imperialist project, actively, where the state has decided it's going to go into a place, take it over, remove anyone in charge, and put, I don't know, make Xi Jinping the emperor of South Africa. Has that happened in our history? No. So I think that we need to be very wary about how we are building a multipolar world. We need to be very wary, especially now that BRICS is happening in South Africa, about the changes that are happening. But we also have to be very wary about the discourses that are coming out of the global north, like the United States, like the United Kingdom, who have actually dominated the world. They've actually done it, right? They've actually dominated the world. And now that there could be some waning power, there's an issue. Even Russia, throughout the anti-colonial movement, was absolutely present in Africa through giving aid, through giving arms, through training people. After the anti-colonial movement ended, in West Africa and North Africa and in Francophone Africa, do Russians have bases, military bases there, comrades? Can you all help me out? No, they don't have military bases there. Do Russians take control of the economy of those places? No. Right now in places like Niger and Burkina Faso, with that amazing man. Oh my God, that man is amazing. I just have to say, I mean, I don't know about his politics just yet, but I'm just talking, I'm just talking aesthetically. We also have eyes, we can see. So aesthetically, you know, very pleasing to look at. But the point is that they are actually fighting, because even though colonialism ended long ago, their currency is still held in France. No one's currency in the whole African continent is held in Russia. So who is this world domination that they are talking about, what it is? So I think we always have to be wary about these things and ask these questions when we are reading these things, because sometimes they can be misleading. You can't say that, okay, Stalinist wasn't the nicest person. Stalin, I'm saying, wasn't the nicest person. We all know that, and we can agree on the failures of Stalin, but it doesn't mean that he was necessarily wanting what people accuse him of wanting in terms of world domination. I think the Cold War was something that was orchestrated by the United States because they did not want communism at all. So for the United States, if a country is like, I want to be communist, please leave me alone to be communist by myself, what do? They put sanctions on you. They put embargoes on you. They did that. What have they done to Cuba? I mean, they're basically starving Cuban people. What are they doing in Venezuela? They do this everywhere. I mean, if South Africa had decided in 1994 to say, thank you, America, you didn't help us at all, you were actually benefiting with your Anglo-America all the time, one example. Can we just be communists by ourselves quietly here in the corner? We won't worry anyone. They would have destroyed us. They would have said, no ways is this happening, right? And they would have come for us, like they come for people all the time who do this. So I think this issue is just something we have to be aware of all the time and question those narratives. Yeah, sorry, I gave you a really long answer. Okay, great. Thank you guys, and thank you for coming. Tomorrow is going to be our final day, and I think what's really important about tomorrow is we are doing Emma Mashinini. I will also speak about Jabu Ndlovu as well, and I think it's really important for us to see how working class women in South Africa, like we looked at the 1956 campaign, but how working class women in South Africa organized workers, how they worked, how they understood the system of capital and the system of racism. I mean, Emma Mashinini has this amazing moment where she says when she saw the police shooting and attacking black people, she realized she was working in a factory that made the uniforms of those people. And that whole thing is just amazing. So yeah, hope to see you all tomorrow, and thank you all for coming.